Hi, I'm Rachel Sanborn, and this is my group video project, section 5.4 to 5.6. There are two kinds of behavior, voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary is when you choose to do something, and involuntary is when you do not choose, you have to. This kind of learning that applies to voluntary behavior is operant conditioning. And operant conditioning, which is both similar and different from classical conditioning, which is what Brianna is talking about in the first sections. Um, Edward L. Thorndike was the first researcher to explore and attempt to outline the laws of learning voluntary responses. Although the field was not yet explored yet, so it wasn't called operant conditioning yet. He was just trying something new. He placed a cat into a box and wanted to see how long it took the cat to reach the food outside of the box. It pushed and shoved and attempted to get to the food as many times as it could. And once it learned that it pushed the box over hard enough that they could get the food, it was a pleasurable response. So it learned that if it pushed the box over, it could get to the food. Um, Thorndike he realized that the cat learned that if he pushed the box over, then he would get the food, so he started moving the food around. Each time he would do that, the cat would do less and less time. It would take him less time to get the food. Therefore, Thorndike developed the law of effect. That is, if an action is followed by a pleasurable consequence, it'll tend to be repeated. If an action is followed by an unpleasant consequence, then it is likely to not be repeated. That is the basic principle for learning voluntary behavior. Skinner found the work of Thorndike a way to explain all behavior as the product of learning. He gave this learning of voluntary behavior a special name, and that is operant conditioning. When people form a voluntary action, it's either to avoid something or to get something. It's like a want. So for Skinner, operant behavior is the learning of such behavior is operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, learning depends on what happens after the response, which is the consequence. In a way, operant conditioning can be summed up is if I do this, what's in it for me? What's in it for me represents the concept of reinforcement. Reinforcement means strengthen. So Skinner did much work in this field as well. He believed that reinforcement is a consequence that is in some way pleasurable. Pleasurable could mean receiving food, money, or even negative reinforcement, not doing a much hated chore. This relates back to the law of effect. Skinner's work reinforced the cat with food every time it got out of the box. So it learned it was a pleasurable consequence to getting out of the box. Reinforcement is key to learning. There are four types of reinforcement. Primary and secondary reinforcers are the first two. Primary is any reinforcement that is naturally reinforced by meeting a basic need, like hunger, thirst, or touch. Freedom from pain is also considered a basic need because pain can be reinforced when removed. Secondary reinforcement are any reinforcement that becomes reinforcing after being paired with a primary one, such as praise, money, or gold stars. Giving someone money, for example, is a secondary reinforcer, but when the person uses that money to buy food, the food is a primary reinforcement. The last two are positive and negative reinforcement. Positive is the reinforcement of a response by the addition or experience of a pleasurable consequence, which is just, pat on the back, money, anything like that, because it's positive. It's a good thing. Second is negative reinforcement, which is hard for most people to understand. It is the reinforcement of a response by the removal, escape, or avoidance of an unpleasant stimulus, which is like if a person did something to make the pain stop, they're more likely to do that again, whatever it was to make the pain stop. Partial reinforcement effect is the tendency for a response that is reinforced after some, but not all, correct responses to be very resistant to extinction than a response that is continuous reinforcement. A reinforcement for every correct response, which is that continuous is much easier to understand and it's always constant, happening a lot. But partial reinforcement behavior is difficult to suppress and it's more like real life. For example, you could say that partial reinforcement is getting rewarded for something occasionally. You know, you do good at work. They don't congratulate you every single day for coming to work. Like, hey, you came to work. No, they will congratulate you when doing something at work. So, maybe um, condition reinforcement is more like you going to work and being congratulated for doing something good at work every once in a while is partial reinforcement. The difference between fixed and variable interval schedule of reinforcement is fixed interval is the time that must pass before reinforcement becomes possible. It's all the same. Variable interval is the time that must pass before reinforcement becomes possible. It's all different for each and every trial. Fixed ratio is the number of responses required for reinforcement is always the same. And variable ratio is the number of responses that is different for each trial. That is much like fixed fixed and variable intervals, as I discussed earlier. That was section 5.4 to 5.6 in a nutshell.